sometimes you need to be on the learning side as well, because you hear new perspectives, and it's very important to hear younger voices. And as Sangramji said, I'm on the wrong side of my age. I've said everything that I have to say, but I continue to say the same thing. But what is important is workshops like this are life transforming. And I congratulate all the organizers for organizing this workshop. It was one such workshop that changed me and, brought me to this field. So that's why I truly believe, these workshops are very important. So I'm starting with this little picture, and I've also kind of played around with the title itself, saying, reimagining citizenship through law, navigating power in fragmented cities. So what do you do when governance is failed? I come from from the city of Bangalore. I was born, brought up there. I've lived there all my life. As all of you know, it is known for its all the science. It's BT, IT, endless. But with all the science in that city, we've not got some of our basic stuff right. We've managed to mess up our waste. We've managed to completely mess up with our water systems. We've not really thought about housing. Our transport is crazy. We are very famous for that. So we've not got anything right. So for what joy is all that science if you have not been able to use that science in planning your city, right? So from that perspective, this is a very recent picture. Just about 20 days ago, I got this picture from the center of the city. Can somebody tell me what this picture is about? What does it talk about? What do you see in that picture? Perfect. So, in the context of climate change, there are migrants from North Karnataka who come to Bangalore for construction work, and they land up with all these road works and things like that, very temporary jobs. And there is this lady with this small baby. She's just tied her sari and she's put the baby there. And you can just see how dangerous it is, the kind of risk that she is taking in fixing our city. And this is just across the main central city of the city market, where we have the Bangalore Palace and all of that. And this is exactly what we've been talking about the last 2 days. So for who are we building these cities? Who gets to make the plans? Who has a voice? Who has no voice? Who feels that belonging to the city? All of those questions, right? Yeah, so I thought in that context, when the system of governance is completely failed, I told you, in Bangalore, governance has not worked at all. It has completely failed. We are a city where, our lakes are fuming, foaming. They caught on fire, which you will not read anywhere else in the world. And we have so many landfills all over. Our traffic is a mess. So when a system like this breaks down, and the poorest of the poor and the most marginalized have nowhere to go, and what do you do? You can't be waiting for, governance to fix itself. And that's when you become creative. That's when you think out of the box of governance, and you keep thinking of, okay, if this is not going to work, what is it that we can use to fix this little village where all the city's waste is landing up? Again, when we are talking about landfills, it is at the intersection of caste, class, religion, language. You look at any landfill across the country, it is either in a Dalit village, it is in a place where the religious minorities live, right? So why do we choose those kind of places? So that is when you will start thinking. So long back, when some of these issues, most of these issues are a decade old, and some are 2 decades old. But those issues continue to haunt us even today. Not everything is solved. So I thought I would just give a glimpse into how we have made some of the local governance work and some of the laws that we have largely kind of, depended on. See, first of all, the 74th Amendment, despite its weaknesses, despite it being an afterthought, despite it not being implemented, still remains that thread in law which you have to rely on. Those 18 functions under the 12th schedule is a function eventually of the local government. Of course, depends on which city you come from. In Bangalore, in Karnataka, there are only 4 powers that have been devolved to the local government out of the 18. And these are waste management, public health, sanitation, and birth and death documentation among the long list of 18. So that still remains some kind of an anchor on which you have to depend on. So when we started figuring out how we could solve some of these problems, so the problems that came to us were Dalit villages in North Bangalore were being affected by the waste that was being piled up, and they were at our doorstep. So when I say our doorstep, it was this organization called Environment Support Group, uh, which was functional since 1998. And we responded to issues that local communities, particularly communities who were at risk, who were marginalized, were facing. So the Dalit villages had come to us saying, please do something about this waste that is landing up next to our village. Our water is polluted. Our soil is polluted. We can no longer grow anything there. Our livelihoods are gone. Our animals are dying. And again, in a so-called science city, these are villages where literacy is very minimal. And the kind of occupation has largely been agro-pastoral. It's as a crow flies, it's hardly 8 kilometers from the center of the city. And that's the stark, difference. So we started thinking, what could we do? Then we also had lakes which were privatized. We should also remember, in a country like ours, we have privatized rivers. The Bhavani River in Chhattisgarh, 23 kilometers of it was privatized at one point of time. So was it in Tamil Nadu. Then lakes got privatized in Bangalore. And that's when we said, we need to do something about it. And governance is not working. What do we do? So that's when we started reading all the provisions that were there, the legal provisions that would support some of these cases. And some of those I've just briefly mentioned here, not all of them, were the Karnataka Town and Country Planning Act, which is a very crucial act. Many of the states have a Town and Country Planning Act, and that came very handy in addressing some of the issues. Then the prevention of water prevention and the Pollution Act of 1974, although it is a very old act, that came to the rescue. I will explain how we used each of it. And the public trust doctrine itself, which has been there since the 1892, but then it was formally used by the US Supreme Court, and then it was adopted in India with the MC Mehta case in 1997. That kind of laid a beautiful foundation for the public trust doctrine. And then the safeguard mechanisms of all the banks, the financial institutions that fund the so-called projects that we see coming up in our cities, right? So this is just like a glimpse of what we have used, not everything. Yeah, so the first of the story is this landfill story. Mavalipura was one of the first landfills where nearly half of the city's waste was reaching. On a daily basis, about 500 trucks would reach there, dump the waste, and get away from there. And originally, the municipality told the villagers, oh, this is very good manure material. Just spread it on your field. It'll be very good for you. One of the farmers said, oh, the other farmers will not agree. You can put it on my field, but give me something out of it. He got into an illegal agreement with the city municipality. The city municipality paid him 75,000 rupees a week, and he got all the waste dumped on the land. And it became a big mess because it was mixed waste. And then there was leachate. Bangalore also receives a lot of rainfall. So there was flooding, the well water, pond water, lake water, bore well water, everything was contaminated. People were falling sick. The people in these villages had to sit inside mosquito nets to eat their meal because the whole place was infested with flies and mosquitoes. And the waste dumps themselves had a whole lot of predatory birds, dogs, and there were also rat pickers who were, leading a life on that because they were, all day long, they would scavenge through those piles, earn some 150 rupees. That was the kind of life that was happening in Mavalipura. So when they came to us, we did some field visits. We spoke to the panchayat. We understood that the panchayat had just not done anything despite having all the powers. So we used a simple provision in the Water Act, which says that if somebody is polluting my drinking water source, you can write a letter to the concerned authority, and that automatically becomes a petition in the local magistrate court. So using that provision in the Water Act, we urged the local community. Of course, it required a lot of explanations. See, also there are language barriers. All our law is written in English. We had to translate all of that to Kannada and explain it to them, convince them. And once they were convinced, they took the initiative to write a simple letter to the Pollution Control Board saying that our drinking water is polluted. That was the beginning of this 2-decade struggle. And it became a big issue in the Pollution Control Board. The media picked it up. It became an issue in the assembly. People started discussing it. Elected representatives were discussing about it. And then the forest department woke up to it. They said, oh, we have a small patch of forest there. And when they came and saw, the waste was actually dumped on the forest land and not on the farmer's land. But he had become super rich by that time. And what they did, they lit the whole waste on fire, brought some soil from somewhere and covered it up. And then the city municipalities, they told the villagers, oh, don't worry, here we messed up, but we will create a new waste processing facility, which will be scientifically done. We will take 100 acres of your pasture land and do it. We'll turn your little village into Singapore. And given that this place is, again, very close to the international airport, the local people thought, okay, there might be something good, and they just agreed to it. And the second landfill, the same thing happened. So all along this time, we conducted water analysis in all the wells, bore wells, ponds, lakes. We did health studies among all those villagers. And eventually in 2012, the local community said enough. The second landfill is also becoming a big mess, and they protested. And in that protest, unfortunately, one young boy lost his life. And the city also used a lot of force, police force, and all of that stuff. They jailed them, the usual stuff that the city does. But at that point of time, again, the local community said, no, I think we've tried everything we can do. Let's now file a petition. So we helped them file a public interest litigation in the High Court of Karnataka, and the High Court of Karnataka systematically looked at it, gave systematic orders. It looked at ward-wise generation of waste in the city. And so basically our petition listed all the provisions of the 12th schedule, particularly the waste-related provision, and how ward committees were missing, how the ward office is eventually responsible for the waste, so on and so forth. So at that time, the code directed the city municipality to set up the ward committees and hold the meetings of the ward committees every month and put up the minutes of the meeting on the website. Even today, that continues despite the local elections have not happened. And that's a different story by itself. Bangalore is undergoing such a big transformation. We have a new authority called the Greater Bengaluru Authority, which, according to me, is completely unconstitutional. But anyway, that's a different battle we have to deal with. But ward committees became active. Resident welfare associations do take part. Yes, there are challenges of the upper class and caste having a say, but at least there is something happening, and there is some segregation of waste that is happening. At least 30 to 40% of the city today is segregating the waste. Ward committees are looking into it, even though they are not formal ward committee members. Ward offices are responding to people's issues of waste related issues. So this provision of using law um, to fix local governance has been very helpful. And I thought I should share the story. That story has been captured in a very beautiful film called Waste in the City. It is on YouTube. I've also provided it at the end of my presentation. The second story is about the lakes. See, Bangalore is a city that does not have any rivers close by. We get water 100 kilometers away from the river Kaveri, pushing it up again 1,000 meters above sea level. It comes at a huge cost of energy and more. And Bangalore itself was a city, also known as the city of lakes. We had some 1,000 odd lakes at one point of time, but the city grew, urbanization happened, and we are left with less than 200 lakes. But even those 200 lakes, the city set up this special purpose vehicle, another parastatal called the Lake Development Authority. And the Lake Development Authority, the first thing they did was to privatize 4 lakes. What is wrong with privatization? If you're privatizing water, what's wrong? They will manage it, look after it, they will give you all the services. So what? Exactly. So in the context of Bangalore, lakes are used not just for recreational purposes. They're also places of livelihood. Fisher folk get leases. The dhobis use that water for their dhobi ghats. Then you also have the flower sellers who harvest lilies. Given that we have a lot of temples in Bangalore and all year-long festivities, never-ending festivities, you also need all those lilies. So, and even the pastoral communities use it during the summer. And these lakes were not supposed to be perennial, they are seasonal. They get filled because of the monsoon, and then they last till about February, March, and then they dry up. And that's when the pastoral communities use it for grazing. Sometimes, if even if there's a little moisture, they just get a quick crop of, some drought resistant crop like chili or ragi or something like that. But once the lakes were privatized, obviously they were not going to allow any of these activities. And the agencies to which they had given it away for privatization, one of them I will just name was Hotel Oberoi. So that's when we again started at the ground level, worked with LDA saying this is not done, you should not be privatizing it. We held all those nice, sweet things of protesting human chains around these lakes, candlelight vigils, and bird watching. And Bangalore has a very big bird watching community. So we did all of that, but nothing would change the decision maker's mind. We also got big judges, retired judges, and film stars to come and sign a petition and all of that. But nothing would change their mind because there was a lot of money that was involved. So here is where we use the public trust doctrine. The government is a custodian of all the common property resources, be it rivers, lakes, ponds, forests, grazing pastures. All of that belong to the people. The government is only a custodian of it. So we used that provision and said lakes cannot be privatized. So again, we went to the High Court of Karnataka. The High Court of Karnataka set up a committee with, again, for the first time in the history of the country, it's made a sitting judge of a High Court chair the committee. And that committee went around Bangalore, looked at the lake, spoke to the local communities, and gave a fantastic report called the A.K. Patil Committee report. And that report was, verbatim in the final judgment. So that's how powerful that committee report was. And in the final judgment, when the final judgment was being dictated, my colleague Leo, who's been largely instrumental in a lot of all this work, who's been a part of ActionAid's work for a very long time, while the judge was dictating the judgment, he said, oh, but maybe you should say it is applicable to all the lakes of Karnataka. So the judge very nicely said, yes, we should make it applicable to all the lakes of Karnataka. So that judgment today protects 40,000 odd lakes of Karnataka, and everywhere. Some of the interim parts of the judgment is, waste cannot be dumped in it, sewage cannot be dumped in it. And if there are encroachments should not be evicted without building proper homes for them, without resettling them and rehabilitating them properly. So one of the first lakes where they actually did it was a lake called the Subramanyapura Kere in South Bangalore. There was the village grazing land there. Again, Karnataka Slum Clearance Board, it was originally called, now it is Slum Development Board. So that KSDB got access to that land, and it built housing for the people who had encroached there, and they have been resettled, and before the lakes have been rejuvenated and restored. There are challenges in the way restoration is happening, but nonetheless, we are going in at least to some 90% in the right direction. And it has said no to privatization for posterity. So lakes will not be privatized ever. And the Karnataka State Legal Services Authority took cognition of this, and they conducted workshops across all the districts in Karnataka, empowering and doing the capacity building of all the line departments so that everybody wakes up to this lake judgment. See, water is so important in the context of climate change. So water in the context of lakes is largely secured because of this one order in Karnataka. Yeah, the third story I thought I should share is the whole thing of road widening. So as cities are expanding, you need to widen your roads. It's like, you're eating a lot of gulab jamuns like this afternoon, and you need to change your dress clothing, and you need to change your sizes. It's exactly like that. Because Bangalore, on all sides of Bangalore, we have automobile manufacturing units. We have Toyota, we have Volvo, and not very far, we have Kia. And on the way to Chennai, we have everything from Mercedes-Benz to BMW to everybody there. So obviously, the city wants all those cars. And once you get the cars, you anyway have the IT-BT companies who are giving tax-free holidays and interest-free loans to buy not just their homes, but buy the second car and third car, so on and so forth. So Bangalore's roads have to get widened, right? But widening of the road means you will cut the trees. You will take away the footpaths. And if the footpaths go, the street vendors are going to lose their right to sit there. So that's when we mobilized everybody. And that was an issue. We mobilized from rich homes to small homes to street vendors to shopkeepers, everybody. And it was a huge protest in the city. And eventually, it was more a delay tactic. Although we did go to court at some point of time, the delay caused by all of this, and the best part was, as part of the project, if they were going to take your land away on the road, they were not going to give you a compensation. They offered something called the transfer of development rights, which is a chit of paper. You can only build upwards. It's like a right to build upwards. They're not going to give you money to build upwards. And there was no uptake of that at all. Very few people had agreed to it. So eventually they had some 500 odd roads that they wanted to widen, but they landed up widening only those roads where the government departments were there. They never touched the roads where private, houses were there, because these delay tactics help. And as part of that campaign, we also pushed all the residents who were listed under the road widening to file cases in the High Court. Obviously, the court was like overwhelmed with all these cases. So it eventually never happened. The road widening didn't happen. Yeah, this was an example I shared yesterday. This again is to do with commons. Because it is an IT-BT city, they wanted to introduce electronic ID cards, which you would just swipe at the gate and go inside, and which would definitely cost some 200 or 500 rupees. So this was a way to keep a certain class away from these parks, right? So again, in this case, protests and the use of the public trust doctrine saying that parks are public commons, it has to be accessible to all, and giving representations to the horticulture department and all other concerned departments, and getting everybody to participate. It was not just NGOs working on these kind of, urban issues, but the LGBTQ community, the sex workers community, the senior citizens organizations, then getting organizations working for child rights, all of them came together, women's organizations, everybody came together, and everybody bombarding these departments with letters and others quoting the public trust doctrine. They withdrew that decision. Yeah. So the last of the story that I want to share is about the metro. So in Bangalore, the metro is being laid by ripping open the city. Bangalore does have a lot of history. They're just bulldozing into that history, and they wanted to lay the metro. So again, at that time, we brought in the provisions of the Karnataka Town and Country Planning Act, both in the road widening case and the metro case. We brought in the provisions of the Town and Country Planning Act, which says that if a road is to be widened, or if you want to lay a metro, you need to have public consultations in every road, which is humanly impossible for the state because it's so time consuming, right? So they didn't want to do it. And again, here a lot of protests, organizing, mobilizing, all of that happened. But eventually, in the core of the city, the metro has gone underground. And we managed to save some green boulevards of the city. So if you ever come to Bangalore, if you're traveling by the metro, come to the Jayanagar area, and you will see a beautiful green boulevard that got saved because of this petition and use of these laws. More importantly, in the so the first phase of the metro, the court said that, now the investments have come, so we'll only make sure that the center of the city is underground. Wherever we can save whatever we will save, but let them just move ahead because they've already put in so much investment. But in the second phase, they will follow all the provisions of the Town and Country Planning Act and all other acts. But the Metro Corporation never did that. BMRCL never did that. So in the second phase, while they went about their arrogant way of building, they were going to bulldoze that beautiful 100-year church. That was a church built by the British for the soldiers. It was the soldier community that used to go to that particular church. It has a beautiful garden, rich in biodiversity. It runs a old age home. It runs a opportunity school for the disabled. And it's a very vibrant community that uses that church space. It's some 100-odd acres, and that was going to go. So we had tried everything, right? Again, going to court was only going to take away a lot more time. So this time here, we used a very different strategy. We found out who was funding that stretch of the metro. It was the European Investment Bank. So we made the local community write to the European Investment Bank saying, this is the history of our church. These are the numbers of people who are coming to this church. Would you allow a metro in your city if there was a church like this? Would you allow it to be bulldozed? So soon after that, through COVID, the European Investment Bank sent two lawyers. These lawyers came, worked with the local community, with the BMRCL, and they held meetings in the open with masks and not touching everybody and crazy stuff, but they did it. And then the meetings went on online for almost a year, thanks to Zoom and Google Meet and other things. And eventually BMRCL backed out of bulldozing that church. So again, I think other than the Tata Mundra case, this is the only other case where the safeguard mechanism is being used. So to those of you who may not know what safeguard mechanisms are, all the investment banks have something called the safeguard mechanisms. And under the safeguard mechanisms, they are not supposed to fund anything that is environmentally destructive, socially unjust, so on and so forth. But very few people even think about it, go after it. I'm not saying everything will be successful, but you cannot not do it, because you will leave behind a story saying that somebody somewhere questioned it and did it. So yeah, so moving forward, cities change when people choose to question what is taken for granted. So there are many such stories. I thought just these four will do for today. So alongside local communities, the work that we did, what remains is not just the impact of specific issues, but we have left behind a legacy of people knowing that they can question, engage, and reshape governance. So in Mavalipura, where the landfill was closed, the Bangalore Development Authority was going to take their land to create a new judicial layout, the irony of it for all the judges. So they are fighting. The people of Mavalipura are fighting that case at the NGT all by themselves. Yeah, so I've given some references, some writings from Leo. Then these are links to the films. Waste and the City is one of the most recent film made by Teapoy Films. It got selected for the Environment Film Festival and it was shown in all the major cities. So I would urge all of you all to watch that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Bhargavi ji. So now I request Dr. Matthew to say a few words, then we'll open up for discussion.
Hope I'm audible. I will go by the few words with an underline. It's quite interesting that somebody who applied as a participant is on the stage and such a pan of ideas came through. In fact, I would prefer to be an interlocutor and an active listener, but I will just share a few thoughts of how we extend the Center for Urban Studies and the kind of work that we envisage along with very vibrant young crowd here and many of you who will probably also form part of our networking. So if I may start, I will start with two of the nomenclatures of the works that I've been involved with. One is Urban Utopias, and the second one is Cities in Flux. These were the two thoughts that emerged right after research when we thought that there needs to be a platform into which we have to bring urban understandings in order to have an understanding of the way in which what we generally call a neoliberal spatial formation emerges. So our attention was spanned towards South Asian context. And what we interestingly found was that there is a coming together of excess and expulsion. There is a way in which cities cater to excesses and the way in which utopias and the virtualities set real in the cities in terms of material relationships on the one hand, and when you expand, The favorite word in Malayalam would be vikasanam, which is like expansion. When you expand, you have to congest. So there is a way in which you also expel people. So there's a lot of people who get marginalized in city making process. The second is the idea of flux, which came out of an interesting interaction with people from New York University. There was a bringing together of scholars to work on a post-pandemic mobilities in the city, especially people who had to physically move out of the city. So people on the move, people who are informal, suddenly become precarious in city ecosystems. So these two works try to place ecology and environment in perspective in certain kinds of way. Now I'll just dwell upon three key ideas briefly, and I'll also reflect from what I could learn from three spaces that I had I could involve with. The three key ideas, in fact, come also from the previous talk as well as some of my research scholars' interactions. They are, first is navigation. How you navigate city spaces, how you navigate ecosystems. That emerges from the exercises that we've had with the student groups here, who physically go to the cities and walk through the cities and try to understand how experiential urban formations could be understood. Only by doing that will we be able to draw in how ecologies are. The second is the idea of fragmentation. Fragmentation is also emerging from this kind of top-down designs which are imposed on the city, which often get challenged when events like flood, for example, takes place. When floods take place, what you understand is some of the top-down impositions of design do not work. What really works are the relationships that you covered it up with. And third is the idea of entanglements. Again, an idea that comes in many imaginations. One of my favorite ones is the often portrayal of the conflicts that humans and non-humans are put into in city environments. You can see posters of dogs with snarling teeth, which are depicted on the roads, for example. So I often share this with my young scholars because, it's as if, the dog, rose up in the morning and it decided to, bite around people. Or, I mean, it's not just about dogs, but it extends all the way to otters, birds. And now I often also hear about squirrels, interestingly. So, I mean, a news report really reported that an otter's favorite activity is to drink blood from humans and goats in a popular newspaper. So there is a way in which conflict becomes a motive in portrayals. So entanglement is one of the ways to come out of conflictual portrayals that we have in the city, and that applies to different kinds of human beings who live in the city as well. Now, if I may go to my last point, which again comes from, and I have the privilege of working with scholars here, they give me ideas to talk here. So there are works that they have done in Chelanam, the coastal area of Kochi. What you understand is some of the favorite words which are used in environmental understandings like Anthropocene did not happen homogeneously. There is a politics, there is a political economy, there is a political ecology behind the Anthropocene, because when you go to the coast, what you understand is that they are the people who are on the metabolic edges of the city. You draw a lot from them, but they bear the most brunt of the climatic conditions. So how do you factor in such lives into the city is a major thing. Second is the understanding that I got from small time that I could work in the Durban Municipal Corporation, the way in which South Africans after 1996 have reimagined the way funding and power devolves into city environments. What I understood was that there is a move from statutory municipal bodies to the conception of municipal bodies as bodies with agencies. I mean, that's a move that we could draw a lot from. Second is the kind of work that we put into the culture policy making in Kochi City Corporation, where we could bring in ecological understandings and environmental relationships into the designing and policy formations of cities, which is also reflected in the Urban Policy Commission reports in certain places. And the final point I would like to, wrap up my talk as soon as possible. The final point is a very interesting small idea that I got during my research phase in Scandinavia, in Norway. That is the right of enjoying nature. If you're going through the road, you have billboards. If you're walking near the riverways, there are apartments, high-rise apartments. But the rivers is not, they've been emerging for thousands and thousands of years. That's not to be enjoyed by some people sitting in the top floor of apartment. After all, they won't do it even. They're presented and sold like that, but they usually don't turn that way. They turn the other way. So it is an idea called Allemanstraten, which is all man's right to wander, roam. That's like that's not that's like not like an ordered concept. It's a chaotic concept. It's a concept that is out of design. So I would like to end my sharing of thoughts into the importance of looking into what is out of design. And that's probably from where we could draw a lot of insight from, and also the thoughts that emerge in this kind of communicative emergences. Emergences is a favorite word. We don't know what is going to come out of this kind of a gathering. That's where all the hope and all the politics lies. Thank you very much. Allemanstraten. Alleman. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. So we can open up for questions. We have around 20 minutes or so. So can we start, please?
Hello, ma'am. I was reminded of the book authored by Rupa Pai about the history of Kaban Park when you're talking about it. And this is more of a reflection and a comment. So, Kaban Park is portrayed as the green lungs of Bangalore. It's a space where everyone is permitted to enter regardless of their class or caste status. But then I never knew about this move by the government to introduce ID cards in order to demarcate people from entering. So, what you accomplished is a significant deal regarding that. So, just adding that.
Cubbon Park has been a space that has kind of divided the old city and the new city. The old city is the Pete area, what we call. The new city is the so-called MG Road cantonment area. When my parents were young, they could not cross Cubbon Park without a pass. So that was how the British had kind of, laid the rules. And the two different cities, Pete and the cantonment, they had two different municipalities. These municipalities merged only in 1950. And there were a whole lot of divides between the old and the new city. And of course, when the IT came, it took the entire eastern corridor of the city. And that created a third divide to the city. So it is actually a city of divides. And coming back to Cubbon Park, sometime when I think probably 15 years ago, they put up a huge grilled fence. It was not there earlier. And then the state itself has encroached in Cubbon Park. It has built the state legislative assembly there. And then the park is constantly under threat because, they come out with these kind of projects, the ID card, and then they wanted to build something else. But this city has been like very active in protecting it. That is very fascinating. Thank you for that.
So how did you galvanize maybe young people like here or grassroots political workers in Bangalore? And who actually did turn up for all of these protests and who supported you?
Yeah. So, I mean, we all are a big fan of, ESG's work, no doubt about that. But I also wanted to reflect on, see, PIL is sort of a double-edged sword, the court picks up in a case, gives a ruling, and then it's flipped around and used for, that number of, few of the ESG PIL's decisions have been used to also evict in certain other cases. And that's also a dichotomy which has been placed in not exactly PI using that argument, but for example, in Delhi, the people living in Yamuna Pushta has been evicted by saying that it's a ozone. No people should be doing farming here. It belongs to the nature. So there's this sort of dichotomy of people and nature. PILs have been able to win that sort of amount of time. But as you said, 90% work isn't, but this 10% is always sort of, which is being used against the people. What are the strategies of dealing with that, right? Even though there is a clause that they will be said, I mean, we know it barely happens, and it mostly state again uses, the thing that you have used against them, they bring it back and use to evict people, right? So what are the strategies and how do we sort of go forward with that notion? Because there is always that, tension that these are the people who are encroachers. So even the PIL I mean, even though they said this thing, the word encroacher is there. They see them as encroacher to the space of the sort of lay. They don't come as people who have, I mean, all rights or something. They said nature is pristine. These are the encroachers. So those language also gets inbuilt, even though we use PIL as a mechanism. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. To your question, I think at that point of time, see, I'm talking about the time from mid 2005 onwards. But many people identified with Bangalore's trees. And that was what pushed everybody to come for the protest against the tree felling. It started off as a tree felling, and then it became a road widening, and then people got to know the metro is also going to bulldoze all the trees. So trees were something people identified with. We have, again, like I said, bird watchers identified with. And then there are today, you have butterfly watchers, you have ant watchers, and so many branches of people who are doing so many activities in the city. So they were the ones who actually came for the protest. They climbed the trees and sat on the trees all night. In fact, Clifton, one of the lawyers who was with ALF for a very long time, he has his own firm now. He himself was on a tree all night, ensuring it is not going to be felled. And at that time, they also identified themselves as Hasiru Usiru, a group of people who believe that green is our breath. And that group was very active. It was holding talks, workshops, mobilizing more people, talking about bringing in the signs of it, like what tree. And we also did a lot of heritage walks because Bangalore's trees were planted by one Mr. Neginal, who was a forest officer. And the design of how the trees have been planted, Bangalore is all the time in bloom. Starting from January, you have a series of trees that are blooming. So understanding who planted it, when it was planted, these kind of workshops mobilized a lot of people. That helped quite a bit. And answering your question, I think, see, even in the 2012 Lake Order, there were a few gaps in the final judgment. So that's why we had to implead again in 2017. And then the result of that was now the KTL-CDA. And more recently, Putenali Lake Initiative Trust, they came to us despite ESD has not been very functional now. Leo Saldana has been sick, he's recovering. But so we've not been very active. But this trust people came to us and said exactly like, your order is not allowing us to function. See the condition of the lake. So for that, again, the answer is sometimes judges also don't think through the problems. So the answer is to implead again and argue it out and flush out the problems and get a finer judgment. Yeah. And we should not shy away from going to court is what I am saying, because I am somebody who doesn't know law. I'm a botanist by training, far away from law. But I learned to read and interpret law during the course of 25 years. So we should not shy away from that. Thank you.
We have one question.
I don't know, this is a question for you, Matthew. My thinking out loud, maybe. This prolonged dwelling in a city, there would be an affective attachment with the city, those who are staying there for a prolonged time. There will be migrants or some of them who just go there and stay for a few days or some years for study, something, any purpose. Not the activist attachment in this and other sense of a kind of nostalgia or affective attachment. How does it, what is the role of this affective attachment in the ecology of city?
Can I?
Yeah. Then.
Am I audible? That's in fact, the word affective is quite leading, because what I am now trying to also think about is the affective aspects of dwelling. It's an idea that really can only come from the idea of inhabiting a city. Usually the way in which we think about the city is that of exhabitation. It's like you are thinking of that as a space which is away from us. All the aspects in the city, if you relate to, or some that you relate to, that produces this affective space. So that creates definitely both the attachments as well as the frictions. For example, the movements of people, especially I've talked to female populations in the city who have moved to the city for certain reasons. The reasons that they have for the affective attachment that they have with the city is a very political reason, and similarly the migrants, the transients. The problem that we have is we don't really look into those kinds of fringe spaces where affective attachments are formed. We are only looking into the central ideas of designing the city, which is top down, which really resonates with what I was trying to communicate. But I also will couple in the non-human elements in the city, like rats, like cats as well. Thank you.
Hi, ma'am, Bhagya, ma'am. My name is Johnson from ActionAid Bangalore. So I have one small thing to add about Bangalore and also one small question for you. So the thing is, as you said, Bangalore has been urbanly, they are building many things. As per from ActionAid Bangalore, they have conducted one research about lake. So in that, if you see, before 2010, so there were 2000 lakes in Bangalore, but right now, if you see, it's less than 200. So lakes have been destroyed, but as you said, what you did was very good thing. I appreciate that. And moreover, if you see the metro work, what is going on in Bangalore, so the Bangalore population is 1.4 crores as of now. But if you see the people who are using metro, that is only like 8 to 10 lakhs people are using metro. So people should, or government should think whether such a huge population, does it require metro all over Bangalore? So that is one thing. It is development for the development or for the people. So that is my opinion. And as you know, GB is going on, GB Act is going on in Bangalore. So right now it's only 2 zones, but after GB it's going to be 5 zones. And ward is also getting increased. Right now it's 198 ward something, but it's going to be increased to 300 plus watts. And so what do you think about this GB project? I know that you mentioned you are not much interested in that, but what is your thought about it?
Thank you. So again, with going back to your first part of the comment, I think ActionAid also played a very important role in protecting one of the lakes, Kshitij and colleagues, right, Dodda Kalasandra Lake. They've done a lot of work. Thanks to that support. Going back to GBAC, all the people who could do whatever from protesting to writing to raising awareness, they went about doing it. But the current government is, just going ahead with a blindfold like a bulldozer. They are just going ahead. Things are going to be much more challenging. To give you a small example, so now the climate action plan of Bangalore, they're running some pilots here and there. So I told them, and there was a survey that was done. So I told them, just map the survey that has been done against the provision of the 12th schedule, and you will know what you need to fix for climate change related stuff. Because to the very area where they had done the survey, people had complained about flooding, people had complained about no street lights. People said their crematoriums and graveyards were not functioning because of various things. There was a long queue in the crematorium, all these kind of things. So we pushed them to map it against the 12th schedule, and we kind of held a mirror to say what was actually not working. So fixing that would largely help the city become so-called resilient to climate change. But with GBA now, they have removed area sabas completely. So one has to just wait and watch what is going to happen. But that means it's a lot of work for organizations working on these issues and for those of us working in this sector. We should also not shy away from doing what we do. And we should also not be And let me be honest, today we live in a world where funders and philanthropists determine what work we do, right? So we need to be cautious and we need to be able to navigate through those challenges and say, no, the city needs this, we know this work, we will be able to get some result out of it. And these are not projects which you'll work for 3 years. It is not, these are not things that you will put in your results framework and things like that. These are
of urban. Now, one can come on it from the pole of dog lovers, as Menka Gandhi and co did, or many of the middle classes. It's also a class question. That snarling dog is a reality for working classes, and dogs have a unique way of figuring out who are the rag pickers and eating them up, or the bicyclists and so on and so forth. They run behind cars, but they can't get them. But cows, but equally well pigeons in built-up areas. So how do you sort of look at all of these? Because these are driving possible mobilizations, which could also be progressive mobilizations. So I think there are some of these issues that I keep thinking of. So pigeon shit, pigeons, dog bites, dogs, the holy cow, the cow that doesn't move the city, or the cow that needs to be prayed to on Saturdays in the middle of the roads. So there are many issues. Please think about them, and any reflections would really be welcome for us to have some insights on.
That's that's a very significant question. In fact, the question could be used to open up a completely new field of exploration itself. But if I may dwell just on the pigeons, the third one that you marked out. Pigeons are quite interesting the way they inhabit the city. So all of you would know. They can lay eggs on the parapets, and not just pigeons, also falcons. They do that. What we see there is a kind of an adaptation, right? So, for example, there's a lot of work that has been done on house sparrows, who inhabit the markets, and where are the sparrows gone? And that reflects a lot on the way in which the food ingredients are brought in the market, also the way in which shops are designed. In fact, there are less verandas. So it's also about public spaces becoming lesser near the markets. Pigeons in that case is a lot about adaptation. But what I would like to point at through that is the dangerous politics behind the celebration of adaptations. Sometimes not just about pigeons, there are also different kinds of human lives who adapt to city environments. And there is this very, very big literature that celebrates resilience in terms of adaptations, but they are not of choosing. There is a way in which you are really putting them in their place by celebrating resilience. So I think, as you rightly point out, some of these animal lives are not detached from the human lives as well, because after all, we are all animals. So not to take a romantic perspective like the ones that the dog protectors often portray, not that, but something which is rooted in the politics of relationships would probably lead you to understand adaptations not as a choice, but as a way of inhabiting in precarious spaces. So probably that's where I would like to, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Matthew, Bhargavi ji. Thank you for your session. Friends, we'll break for tea now, and we'll come back at 3:40 sharp because the next session is online. Before the speakers leave, I request Sandeep ji, Esther to give the gifts. Okay. Esther. Yeah, please explain. रुक जाओ.
Yeah. 3:40. Yeah. We will be back by 3:45 sharp because we have the virtual session. Somebody is joining from Brazil with us virtually. So we're really respectful of time and come back as soon as possible.
That the settler colonial state has left behind settler colonists who occupy tens and thousands of hectares of land unimaginable in this densely populated country. So the rural or the countryside in Brazil is quite different. Back in 1971, the Kerala government, if you turn the archives, had an official proposal discussed at the highest levels, didn't go through finally, to export some of the Kerala population to the countryside in Brazil. And there are still a few Indians from Kerala. I know one who's around the Amazon area. So there are these historic connections, but we're not going to talk about connections and proposals and ideas. The fact is, Brazil is a very, very stark situation of disparity. I am not an expert. Brian and I worked together, partly at ActionAid in the Latin American context, partly during the times when there was an upsurge of populist struggles on the continent of South of America, partly during the time when indigenous people struggles were asserting themselves. In Bolivia, for instance, the Tribal People's Party, in Ecuador, for instance, but also in Brazil, when a working class person, who is again now the president, Lula, as you know, came to power from the workers' movement, from the urban movement of Brazil. Brian was an organic part of those struggles. He's, of course, today a journalist, today part of the progressive movement of journalists, running, writing, recently covering what was in Venezuela. There he was a week ago. I am here just to give the broad context, the political, economic context from where Brian comes. He's called a gringo. He used to be called a gringo. A gringo means a person of US, but he doesn't belong to gringo politics. He comes from Chicago, and you know the urban struggles of Chicago in the long past. And he comes from a vanishing tribe, or always a vanished tribe in the Americas, called the left in Americas. His mother, I believe, is an active communist even now. Communist is a much denigrated word in the heart of imperialism. So, Brian, I request you to give a sense. Our colleagues here, about 80 of young activists, scholars, thinkers, some senior leaders from different parts of the country, about 15 states to be precise, including those from Kerala, who are very diverse sets of, I will not say ideologies, some of them are shaping, some of them are forming those finding those ideological bearings through active processes of learning, sort of being together, joining in struggles, particularly in Kerala, but elsewhere under challenge. So you are talking to such an august audience who's not totally innate to the questions of, to the urban questions or to the working people's questions. So I would request you to try and cover that in an organic way. We have about half an hour for you or less than half an hour. Try and do as much as you can. There will be subsequent interactions we can get you on. And we at ActionAid Association India and the Mahatma Gandhi University and the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and all of us here are honored to have you here. Thank you for finding the time to address us virtually. We would have loved to have you here, but don't have really the resources to get you here. Over to you, Brian. And if your voice is not clear, then you may want to, we would prefer to see you, but then you may want to switch off your video. Thank you so much and a very warm welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Sandeep. It's great to see you and hear your voice again. As Sandeep mentioned, we've known each other since I did the math while you were talking, 19 years, I think, since the first time we met. And I spent, in 2011, 2 months doing comparative research on city government for the Indian Supreme Court Commissioner's Office during that time when Harsh Mander was there. And so I'd like to open. I know I have limited time. I'm going to try and get through as much as I can. And if the audio is breaking up, if someone could just let me know and I'll turn off the camera. I'd like to just open up explaining some basic differences between city government in India and Brazil, because without this knowledge, it's harder to understand how cities work in both of these countries. First of all, what I learned when I was in India is that city governments in India are dependent, they're like a dependent tier of the state governments, okay? And that they're kind of controlled by the state governments, and they have very low budgets and have attributes sometimes that they don't have the budget to execute on. And I think this problem is exacerbated by the fact that India is still such a rural country that politicians sometimes don't need the urban vote to win elections. So that, I think, leads to further neglect for electoral, purposes maybe. In Brazil, city governments, autonomous units that can issue their own taxes, mandatory block grants from the federal government for things like health and education, plus funding from the state governments. And so they control normally a municipal revenue of between 5 and 7% of the city's GDP. So unlike Indian cities where some of the functions and some of the objectives are bypassed by state agencies and there's funding issues for execution of projects and things like that, Brazilian cities have much larger budgets and strong legal and participatory tools to enforce service delivery, even though there's an overlap with state government on issues like education, health, housing, sanitation, and public safety. For example, in education in your average city in Brazil, you'll have municipal public schools and state government public schools. And you have the same thing with hospitals and things like that. So with that background, a little bit about the problems with Brazil cities and why the country is like 94% urban, as Sandeep mentioned. There's huge problems with concentration of land in the countryside dating back from slavery times. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, there were massive droughts in the poorest region of Brazil, the Northeast. And this caused such a huge wave of migration between 1950 and 1990 that cities like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo saw their populations increase by 500%. Sao Paulo in the 1950s had like 1,700,000 people, and now it has 11 million. And this caused immense stress on the ability of these local governments to provide housing. And this is where the favelas cropped up. So favelas are informal communities where people squat on vacant land, often in risk zones for environmental disaster, like hillsides and the sides of rivers and streams. And they build and neighborhoods crop up, and And for the last, 30, 40 years, the cities have been trying to catch up with the demographic explosion caused by migration. And in many cases, like in Rio de Janeiro, for example, although they might look shocking because of the way they hang up down the sides of the hills and things like that, the majority of favela residents are actually lower middle class. So it's a poverty issue, but it's also a housing issue. So in 1988, Brazil had just transitioned from a brutal US-supported authoritarian military dictatorship and was drafting a new constitution. And the parliamentary body created to oversee the draft of the constitution allowed what are called popular amendments, where anyone who could gather 1 million signatures was able to insert articles into the Constitution. At this point, led by actors in the liberation theology branch of the Catholic Church, social movements, academics, and activists gathered together to push through a constitutional, two articles of the Constitution, Articles 182 and 183, that establish that the social function of property takes priority over profit motive in Brazil. What this means in practical terms is that if there's any land that's not being used productively by the government or owned by the government or the private sector, that's not in an environmental protection zone, any non-landholding citizen can occupy the land, and after 5 years living and producing or working or whatever there, they can successfully register the land in their name. In the countryside, this means, according to the way the law has been interpreted over the years, that landless peasants can occupy tracts of land to farm on, which range from between around 15 to 40 hectares, depending on the biome. And in the cities, what this means is that buildings that are vacant, vacant plots of land, vacant buildings, that have been vacant for over 5 years can be occupied by non-property owners who then have the right to demand that the government converts it into social housing, ownership-based social housing. And so, after these articles of the Constitution were passed, there were a few small urban social movements, but they really exploded with support from liberation theology leaders like Frei Beto, for example, was one. They organized in the poor communities, organized with street-dwelling populations, and began coordinating series of occupations of vacant buildings. And this is important for several reasons. First of all, the right to the city, as defined by David Harvey and others, it's the right for everyone, especially the poor, to benefit from everything the city has to offer, right? All of the amenities, citizens should have the right to access them on an equal level. And normally the way that cities work, especially through favoring downtowns over neighborhoods as development strategies in mayor's offices, is that the best amenities normally are in the city centers, the best parks, the best schools, the best museums and other kinds of institutions that everyone should be able to access. So the right to occupy buildings gives people poor people the right to live in downtown areas of cities. Cities have become, the main motor in many cities, especially post-industrial cities, like you have in Brazil or in the US or something, the main motor is real estate speculation. And so there's a whole industry, for example, if you look in the United States, of real estate mafias buying up property and sitting it vacant. This is called land banking. And by allowing property to sit vacant, They can manipulate land values, property values. They can artificially create a perception of blight, and then help build a call for government funding to fix up the neighborhood which they receive to reform their own properties, you know, and or they can use their property to gentrify a neighborhood by giving free rent and whatever to theaters and art galleries and things like that. But there's a lot of things they can do to manipulate real estate values. The right to occupy these buildings that are being land banked by the real estate companies is a direct assault against capitalist real estate speculation. In the city of Sao Paulo, in downtown Sao Paulo, social movements have successfully occupied over 60 buildings, some of them 20 floors high, some of them with hundreds of apartments in them. And in at least 20 cases, these buildings have already been converted, reformed by the city government and by the state government in some cases, and the federal government, in the case of a federal hospital that was abandoned, that was occupied, converted into apartments. And the original people who coordinated the occupation, they have the deeds to these apartments now. So it's a quick route, not that quick, but it's a route out of poverty as well, because, that's one strategy used by the urban social movements, occupation. And there's another strategy as well that's provided even more social housing in Brazil, which is a strategy in Brazil. It's called multirão. I don't know how to say it in English, but basically groups of landless, poor urban residents get together, normally through social movements organization, and they pressure the government to give them at a very subsidized rate, to sell them at a very low subsidized rate, a big plot of land. The future residents receive training on construction skills, electricity, plumbing, and they assist in the construction through voluntary labor 1 day a week over the course of the construction of apartment buildings. And when the private construction company finishes the construction, they do all the finishing work. They lay the tiles, they do the wiring and the plumbing and stuff like that. And then they are enabled to purchase the apartment at a very low subsidized rate. For example, in an area where the average apartment would cost, let's say, $50,000. I'll use US dollars as an easy standard for conversion, $50,000. One of these subsidized social movement apartments would be sold to the original, occupant resident at a subsidized rate for like $4,000, paid over the course of 20 years, with all kinds of guarantees that if they lose their job or whatever, they won't have to make the payments. And this has become, I would say, unfortunately, this has become the main priority for the Workers' Party governments in terms of social housing. In addition to just like regular capitalist housing construction for low-income residents that receive subsidies from the government through tax breaks and stuff as well. The main program for the social movements is this program. It's called Minha Casa Minha Vida Entidades, at the expense of occupying buildings in downtown areas, which have to be, the rights to these buildings are always achieved through a lot of pressure, a lot of protest, and normally with more success in leftist governments in Brazil. The conservative governments tend to ignore the Constitution, ignore Articles 182 and 183. But one thing that's interesting about the second social movement social housing construction tactic is that, first of all, there's always priority on women, head of household, as the deed holder. So almost always it's the woman of the household. And there have been cases where the minute they get the deed, the woman kicks the husband out, says, "You're an abusive husband. I'm not putting up with your abuse anymore. I have my own apartment." This model of citizens helping in the construction of their own apartment blocks and receiving the apartments at very low subsidized rate in a process led by women was actually, through years of interaction between the Brazilian social movements and social movements in Venezuela, it became the basis for Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro's Gran Vivencia project. So whereas in Brazil, this program line, Minha Casa Minha Vida Entidades, in which the social movements assist in the construction of their own housing, that only represents about 5 to 10% of the federal government's housing budget. In Venezuela, this model became the primary model, the main model used in the construction of over 5 million apartment units in a country that only has a population of 28 million. So even though it's kind of a smaller program in Brazil, it has a big influence on, it's had influence on other countries and things like that. So meanwhile, the social movements continue fighting for their rights, continue to fight for the right to land. There's still a lack or a shortage, let's say, of 5 million what you would call dignified housing units in Brazil, a country with a population of about 220 million. That's still significant. People are still fighting, and the fight for access for the working class and poor to all of the benefits and amenities the city has to offer through living in the downtown areas and the central areas of the city, getting out of the modern slavery of having to spend 4 hours a day commuting to and from work in the big cities and things like that. That's still a major battle as the private real estate companies continue to try and evict and kick poor people out of the city centers as the social movements are occupying and trying to move people into the city centers. I think that's, well, just to close, I'll just say this. What are some problems with the urban social movements? Many of them have aging leadership, and there's been a decline of liberation theology, Catholicism in Brazil, and a huge rise in evangelical Christian sects, most of which come from the United States, that promote capitalist individualism over collective action. You know, and this has caused a lot of challenges for all of the social movements in Brazil. But they keep fighting on, just as everyone must keep fighting on against the advance of capitalism and imperialism in the world. I think I will end this for now and take questions from you. I was told I could speak for 20 minutes. I think I've been speaking for 25 minutes, if that's okay.
Yes. Thank you, Brian, for walking us through the history of struggle in Brazil and Venezuela and the kind of models that are prevalent there. And it was truly, inspiring to hear about those struggles and also the questions you raised about the problems with sort of urban politics and urban social movements. As you requested, I think because it's challenging to facilitate Q&A, we would take few questions as Brian has requested. So if there are any questions, we can pass on the mic. Okay, there is one. I think that, yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for your lecture. I was just wondering, in your opinion, what you thought movements for social housing and for urban democracy and local governance that exist in India and in our local context, which obviously is very different from that in Brazil. But I was wondering what lessons you think that we could draw from the experiences that people have undergone in Brazil, particularly when it comes to the questions around the legality of occupation, etc. So I was just wondering what you thought we could learn from those movements.
Well, I think that the one thing is that in Brazil, to make change, positive change at the municipal or local level, it was really fundamental to create this national push to change the constitution, to change the laws around land rights. I know that there, for example, when I was in Kolkata 15 years ago or whatever, I know that there are people whose families have been living there for hundreds of years who don't have any land rights because they're labeled as Bangladeshi or something because they're Muslim. I mean, what I saw when I don't know what's changed since then. I assume things have probably gotten worse. Maybe that's the wrong assumption, but what I saw is that the actual rights to land are much weak or poorly defined in India than in Brazil. And in Brazil, even though the Constitution establishes these rights, occupations in rural and urban areas are constantly violently evicted by antagonistic local governments. So without the language incorporated into the Constitution, they would have very little protection. So I think the one lesson from Brazil is that if you want to change, make changes at the local level in cities and stuff, it's important to push for changes at the national level. And that can only be done through forming national coalitions, social movement coalitions, and things like that. I mean, I don't know how well that applies to India, but that's my response.
Yes. Are there any other questions? I think no. So thanks a lot, Brian. And it was truly an honor that you could join us. And it was our loss that we could not have you here today with us. Yeah, and it's very difficult to do, I mean, you understand Q&A virtually, but I would request if you would like to share any readings, any particular articles, because we know you write widely on these issues. We would be happy to share it with the participants.
I would just suggest we're in a very tough battle this year in Brazil nationally because the fascists are on the verge of taking the country back over. That's the main issue I'm focusing on right now.
Okay. I think, yeah, I think you're frozen. There is a connection issue.